Welcome to Audiorama Onda Lectora. Make yourself comfortable, listen and enjoy this audiobook and Harnessing the Power Within. My Method of Autosuggestion by Émile Coué.
Forward. Because of the tremendous successes I have experienced with it, I felt a strong need to draw attention to Émile Coué's autosuggestion method. In my opinion, it is incredibly brilliant in its simplicity. Having heard his famous phrase, "Every day, in every way, I feel better and better," many people have tried to improve it. However, if they had read his book, they would really understand Coué's method and would realize why it is important not to try to improve it by adding new details. Even Jose Silva, of the world-famous Silva method, in his attempt to personalize the phrase, just added one more "better" to it. The subconscious mind, or our higher self if you prefer, knows what we need. It is not necessary, and in fact it is inadvisable, to add details to our autosuggestion. The amazing power of the subconscious mind allows it to know much better than we do consciously what exactly our needs are. So why should we stand in its way? It is quite possible that there are needs to be met before we can start working on the needs we are consciously aware of. During a particularly troubled period in my life, I kept a diary in which I faithfully wrote down my thoughts every night. I wrote down the bad things as well as the good things. I got into the habit of reading the previous week's pages from time to time. I soon realized that many of the bad events, the ones I wrote about, had triggered good things. In fact, many of the good things I wrote about could never have happened if the bad things had not happened first. Before long, I became convinced that in reality, I didn't know what was good or bad for me. So what should I pray or meditate about? If I don't really know what is good for me, what should my goals be? Someone much smarter than me advised me, just ask for knowledge, what is best for you, and as that knowledge becomes apparent or available, try to act accordingly. Then I was told, just keep doing the following, in the right way. From that point of view, Coué's statement makes all the sense in the world. Even if we don't know exactly what we need most, our subconscious or higher self really knows. And we can use that knowledge, keeping the statement simple and trusting our subconscious for the results. Some hypnotists say that our subconscious mind does not know the difference between a real or imaginary experience. I do not agree with that theory. I believe that our subconscious mind is capable of operating in dimensions that we have not yet been able to understand. We do not know exactly how it works, but we have begun to know a little how it is used. Some have even said that it does not respond to negative suggestions and then turn around and do therapy, regression to the cause, to eliminate the effects of negative impressions from the past. So, how is your subconscious mind? Is it really dumb? I think it is powerful and amazing, and a long time ago Coué found a good way to use it. Read on, use it, and see how the results prove it. Chapter 1. The Reality of Autosuggestion. I wish to say how delighted I was to come into personal contact with the great American public on their own side of the Atlantic. And at the same time, I could not help feeling a little embarrassed. I had the idea that the people of that continent were expecting some wonderful, bordering on miraculous, revelation from me. When in fact, the message I have to give is so simple that many are tempted at first to consider it almost insignificant. Let me say here, however, that simple as my message is, it will teach those who consent to listen to it and reflect upon it a key to permanent physical and moral well-being, which can never be lost. Autosuggestion is disconcerting in its simplicity. To the uninitiated, autosuggestion or self-mastery may seem baffling in its simplicity. But does not every discovery, every invention, seem simple and ordinary once it has been vulgarized, and its details or its mechanism are known to anyone? It is not that I claim autosuggestion as my own discovery. Far from it. Autosuggestion is as old as the hills, only we had forgotten to practice it, and so we needed to learn it again. Think of all the forces in the universe ready to serve us. However, centuries passed before man penetrated into their secret and discovered the means of using them. The same is true in the domain of thought and mind. We have at our service forces of transcendent value, of which we are either completely ignorant or only vaguely aware. Power of autosuggestion known in the Middle Ages. The power of thought, of idea, is immeasurable. The world is dominated by thought. The individual human being is also entirely governed by his own thoughts, whether good or bad. The powerful action of the mind upon the body, which explains the effects of suggestion, was well known to the great thinkers of the Middle Ages, whose vigorous intelligence embraced the sum of human knowledge. Every idea conceived by the mind, says St. Thomas, is an order that the organism obeys. It can also, he adds, engender a disease or cure it. The efficacy of autosuggestion could not be clearer. Pythagoras and Aristotle were two who taught autosuggestion. We know, in fact, that the entire human organism is governed by the nervous system, whose center is the brain, seat of thought. In other words, the brain or mind controls every cell, every organ, every function of the body. This being so, is it not clear that through thought, we are the absolute masters of our physical organism, and that, as the ancients demonstrated centuries ago, thought, or suggestion, can and does produce disease or cure? Pythagoras taught the principles of autosuggestion to his disciples. He wrote, "God the Father, deliver them from their sufferings, and teach them what supernatural power is at their disposal." Even more definite is the doctrine of Aristotle, who taught that a living imagination compels the body to obey it, for it is a natural principle of motion. Imagination, in fact, governs all the forces of sensibility, while the latter, in turn, controls the beating of the heart, and through it, sets in motion all the vital functions. Thus, the whole organism can be modified rapidly. However lively the imagination may be, it cannot change the form of a hand, or of a foot, or of any other limb. I am especially pleased to recall this element of Aristotle's teaching, because it contains two of the most important, indeed essential, principles of my own method of autosuggestion. 1. The dominant role of the imagination. 2. The results to be expected from the practice of autosuggestion must necessarily be limited to those which fall within the limits of physical possibility. I will discuss these essential points in more detail in another chapter. Unfortunately, all these great truths, handed down from antiquity, have been transmitted in the murky garb of abstract notions, or shrouded in the mystery of esoteric secrecy. And so, they have seemed inaccessible to the common mortal. I have had the privilege of discerning the hidden meaning of the ancient philosophers, or to extract the essence of a vital principle, and to formulate it in a simple and understandable way for modern humanity. I have also had the joy of seeing it successfully practiced by thousands of sick people for more than 20 years. Slaves of suggestion and masters of ourselves. I am not a healer, I can only teach others to heal themselves. I can only teach others to heal themselves and to maintain perfect health. Furthermore, I hope to demonstrate that the field of application of autosuggestion is practically unlimited. Not only are we able to control and modify our physical functions, but we can develop in any desired direction our moral and mental faculties through the proper exercise of suggestion. In the field of education, there is vast scope for suggestion. From our birth to our death, we are all slaves of suggestion. Our destinies are decided by suggestion. It is an all-powerful tyrant of which, unless we pay attention, we are blind instruments. Now, it is in our power to turn the tables, to discipline suggestion, and to direct it in the way we ourselves desire. Then, it becomes autosuggestion. We have taken the reins into our own hands, and have become the masters of the most wonderful instrument conceivable. Nothing is impossible to us, except, of course, that which is contrary to the laws of nature and the universe. How are we to achieve this mastery? First, we must thoroughly understand, at least the elements of the mechanism of the mental part of what constitutes the human being. The mental personality is composed of the conscious and the subconscious. It is generally believed that the power and acts of a man depend almost exclusively on his conscious self. However, it is beginning to be understood that, compared to the immensity of the role of the subconscious, that of the conscious self is like a small islet in a vast ocean, subject to storms and tempests. Dominance of the subconscious over the conscious. The subconscious is a permanent and ultrasensitive photographic plate to which nothing escapes. It records all things, all thoughts, from the most insignificant to the most sublime. But it is not only that. It is the source of creation and inspiration. It is the mysterious power that makes ideas germinate and effects their materialization in the conscious form of action. If we agree that the starting point of our joys, our sorrows, our ills, our welfare, our aspirations, of all our emotions, is in our subconscious self, then we can logically deduce that every idea germinated in our mind has a tendency to be realized. Hundreds of examples, drawn from small incidents of everyday existence, allow us to verify the truth of all this. To illustrate the action of thought on the emotional faculties, we have only to recall any serious accident or heartrending spectacle of which we have been witnesses. Thus we shall immediately feel the sensations of pain or horror with greater or lesser intensity according to our individual temperament. Imagine that you are sucking a lemon. A simpler and perhaps even more striking example is the classic lemon. Imagine you are sucking on a sour and juicy lemon, and inevitably and instantly, your mouth will water. What happened? Simply this: under the influence of the idea, the glands have been put to work, and have secreted an abundant amount of saliva, almost as much, in fact, as if you had bitten into a real lemon. Again, just think of a lined pencil, which is drawn perpendicularly on a blackboard, and you cannot help flinch and twist the face under the impact, while contracted nerves send a shiver from the back of the head down the entire spine. Therefore, we must realize that it is impossible to separate the physical from the mental, the body from the mind, that they depend upon each other, that they are really one. The mental element, however, is always dominant. Our physical organism is governed by it. So that, in reality, we make or break our own health and destiny according to the ideas acting in our subconscious. I mean by this that we are absolutely free to implant any idea we wish in our subconscious, which is an inexhaustible recorder, and those ideas determine the whole tendency of our material, mental and moral being. It is as easy to whisper to our receptive subconscious the idea of health as it is to moan about our troubles. And those who do so may be sure of the result, because, as I hope I have convinced them, it is based on the laws of nature. Chapter 2. The Role of Imagination. Before I begin to explain the practical application of autosuggestion, and the extremely simple method by which it is possible for everyone to acquire complete mastery over his physical organism, I must speak of the all-important role of the imagination. The dominion of the imagination over the will. Contrary to the generally accepted theory, the will is not the invincible force it is made out to be. And in fact, whenever the imagination and the will come into conflict, it is the imagination that triumphs. Try to do something while repeating to yourself, "I can't do it," and you will see this truth confirmed. The mere idea of the inability to perform a thing paralyzes the willpower. Self-mastery is attained when the imagination has been directed and trained to conform to our desires. For although, in a sense, the imagination leans on the subconscious, it dominates the latter. And therefore, if we know how to guide it, our subconscious self will take over our material being and do its work just as we wish it to be done. Or in other words, exactly in conformity with our conscious suggestions. I cannot insist too strongly that in the practice of autosuggestion, the exercise of the will should be strictly avoided, except in the initial phase of directing or guiding the imagination along the desired lines. This is absolutely the only manifestation of will necessary or even desirable. Any other voluntary effort is positively detrimental in connection with autosuggestion and is almost certain to have an effect contrary to that desired. Analyze the so-called strong-willed characters in history, Caesar, Napoleon, etc. You will find that they were all men of great imagination. Certain ideas were implanted in their minds, and their tenacious suggestions impelled them to action. This, however, is a digression. Law of converted effort. What I want to emphasize for the moment is the law which my friend Charles Baudouin calls the converted effort. Suppose a man suffering from insomnia decides to try the effect of autosuggestion. Unless he has been previously warned, he will repeat to himself phrases like these: I want to sleep, I will sleep, I am going to sleep. And all the time he will make desperate efforts to fall asleep. This is fatal. The mere fact of making the effort has turned the latter into a force that acts in the opposite direction to the original suggestion, with the result that the poor man tosses and turns in his bed, in sleepless misery. The imagination must be unhindered. Let the imagination do its work alone, without any hindrance. Remain passive. Through mysterious, as yet unexplained processes, our subconscious does marvelous things. Think of the most common movements of the human body, and ask yourself how they work. What has set the complicated mechanism in motion when you stretch your arm to reach a glass on a table, or when you take a cigarette out of your cigarette case? No one knows. But if we cannot explain the phenomenon, we know that, in reality, it is a command resulting from a simple suggestion, which is transmitted through the nervous system, which is translated into action at a speed infinitely superior to that of lightning. Examples of the power of imagination. Thousands of examples of the power of imagination can be found in everyday life. There is one given by Pascal, and so often quoted, that I cannot but repeat here, because it is a really perfect illustration. No one would have the least difficulty in walking along a plank a foot wide, being placed on the ground. But put the same plank on the other side of a street, at the height of one of your American skyscrapers. Blondel himself would not have dared to rely on it. Anyone who did would undoubtedly fall into the void. No clearer proof of the power of an idea could be desired. Yet, there is another striking example in the impunity with which somnambulists perform the most dangerous feats, such as wandering about a roof, hugging the extreme edge of it, to the terror of their friends who may happen to perceive them. If awakened suddenly, a somnambulist in such a position would inevitably fall. Here is another example. Dr. Pinot, in his book, De la philosophie et de la longévité, he tells us that in the middle of a big dinner, the cook hastened to announce that she had made a mistake and had mixed arsenic with the food instead of another ingredient. Several people immediately suffered pains and nausea, which only ceased when the cook returned to say that it was a false alarm. There had been no such dreadful mistake. I have said enough to prove the irresistible influence of the idea or imagination on the physical organism. It determines pain, movement, emotions, sensations. Its effect is moral as well as physical. We may logically conclude, therefore, that human ailments, which are but disturbances of the natural equilibrium of the elements of our being, may be cured by the right kind of idea or suggestion. The moral factor in all disease. To begin with, there exists in every disease, whatever its nature, a moral factor, which no physician can afford to ignore. Some French medical authorities estimate that this moral factor represents about 50% of the chances of recovery. A patient who says to himself, "I am getting better," greatly increases his vital forces and accelerates his recovery. By gently putting our imagination on the right track, we are sure to help nature, which manifests itself through our subconscious. The instinct of self-preservation is nothing more than a manifestation of nature. At the first sound of alarm, it rushes to our rescue. A cut on a finger or other wound is followed by a rush of red blood cells in the injured part. Our wonderful subconscious self does it. Because it knows and orders every movement of our being, every contraction of our heart, the slightest vibration of every cell of our organism. It is the sublime instrument of which we are prone to misuse, allowing evil, disturbing or discouraging thoughts to interfere with its work, instead of allowing it to work smoothly and harmoniously. Miracles are attributed to the fakirs of India. Legend or reality, I do not know. But certainly, it is true that they do some wonderful things, simply because they are taught from their infancy to know and make use of the limitless invisible and as yet unexplainable forces, which are latent in us, and which can be awakened by thought. The limitations of autosuggestion are unknown. I am often asked, what are the limitations of autosuggestion? I answer, I really don't know. The cures I have seen have sometimes seemed to me so astonishing and so incredible that I refuse theoretically to set any limits. Although, of course, I must insist, one should not expect from autosuggestion anything that is obviously outside the domain of material possibilities. For example, it would be absurd to ask for the growth of a new arm or a new leg, even though the lobster seems to know how to grow a new claw when necessary. There are people who, through long practice and concentration, have acquired an amazing power over their bodily functions. In the Faculty of Medicine in Paris, there are known cases of men able to increase at will the speed of their heartbeat from 90 to 120, or decrease it to a point that the heart seems almost to stop. In another chapter one will speak of the diseases really cured by autosuggestion, and in general, of its sphere of curative possibilities. Let him be fully aware that thought, or suggestion, is capable of molding the human body, as a sculptor chisels his clay. Thought is an act. It is more than Bernheim believed when he wrote, "Suggestion is an idea that can be transformed into action." It is true that cases declared incurable have been cured by autosuggestion. And not only diseases of a functional nature. Sores and wounds of long duration, which had resisted all other treatments, have been rapidly cured by suggestion. Was it not Dr. Carnot who said that the wounds of victorious soldiers heal more quickly than those of the vanquished? I can affirm without hesitation that, whatever the disease, the practice of rational autosuggestion will always produce an appreciable improvement in the patient's condition, even if the disease itself is incurable. Chapter 3. Autosuggestion in Practice. After the foregoing explanations of the theory of autosuggestion, my readers will certainly be desirous of being initiated into the method of putting it into actual practice. We have seen that our physical organism is completely dominated by our subconscious self. The latter, obeying every suggestion, of whatever nature, transmits it as a command to every fiber of the body, and the latter responds or reacts immediately. The only obstacle to the perfect accomplishment of the operation is the simultaneous intervention of the conscious will or reason. What we want to know, therefore, is the mechanism by which we can acquire control of our subconscious self, or in other words, achieve self-mastery. Simplicity of subconscious control. The method is simple in itself. It is so simple that it has been the subject of ridicule, as have been all simple solutions of seemingly complicated problems. But its logic is irrefutable, and its effects are demonstrated every day of our lives. All that is needed is to place oneself in a condition of mental passivity, to silence the voice of conscious analysis. And then, deposit in the ever-awake subconscious the idea or suggestion that one wishes to be realized. Every night, when you have settled comfortably in bed, and are about to fall asleep, murmur in a low but clear voice, loud enough for you to hear yourself, this little formula. Every day, in every way, I am getting better and better. Recite the phrase as a litany 20 times or more, and so as not to distract your attention with the effort of counting, it is an excellent idea to mark the number on a piece of string tied with 20 knots. That is enough to set in motion in the desired direction the stupendous forces of which we can be masters if we really want to. It is a mere suggestion, but that suggestion thrown into the mysterious laboratory of the subconscious self translates instantly into an active and living force. Like the oracles of the ancients. The ancients knew very well the power, often terrible, that is contained in the repetition of a phrase or a formula. The undeniable influence which they exerted through the ancient oracles probably, or rather, undoubtedly, lay in the power of suggestion. Yes, my method of self-healing by autosuggestion is undoubtedly simple. It is easy to understand, and equally easy to practice. However, the human mind is today what it was in the days of the oracles. It insists on associating the healing of the body or the mind with complicated theories and processes which, in reality, are totally unnecessary. Why complain if they make things easier? People may ask, why am I content with prescribing such a general and seemingly vague formula, such as, every day, in every way, I am getting better and better, for each and every ailment? The reason is, strange as it may seem, that our subconscious mind does not need the details. The general suggestion that everything, in every way, is going well, is sufficient to set in motion the persuasive procedure, which will carry its effects to the various organs, and improve all functions. I have had remarkable demonstrations of this, in the course of my long teaching and experiments. Again and again I have seen patients cured, not only of the particular disease for which they sought relief, but also of minor disabilities, which they had almost forgotten. Because a general suggestion is better than specific suggestions. The fact is that our subconscious knows much more than we ourselves can know about our physical organism. Fortunately for us. Think of the mess we would have if we had to take care of all the functions, breathing, digestion, for example. Who is in charge of such a complicated job? The subconscious, and if it ever does its job badly, it is always because, in one way or another, we have voluntarily interfered with it. Every organ or function is connected with others, and depends to some degree on them, and if the ordinary man or woman were to begin to order the subconscious to tinker with a particular organ, it would certainly obey him. Only most likely, then something else would go wrong, as a result of insufficient knowledge, or perhaps complete ignorance of physiology, on the part of the conscious mind. Don't concentrate and leave it to the subconscious. Avoid all effort. When you recite the phrase, every day, in every way, I am getting better and better, you must relax all effort and tension. Do not seek to concentrate your thoughts. Concentration is very valuable and necessary when it comes to conscious reasoning, fatal to the success of autosuggestion. Isolate yourself, however, from everything that can distract your attention. Close your eyes, if possible. Mental isolation can be achieved in the middle of a crowd, even in a streetcar, if necessary. And there is no reason not to practice autosuggestion in such conditions during the day, as long as you manage to put yourself in the right state of passivity. At the risk of being accused of tedious repetition, I must insist on the necessity of passivity and inertia. Do not think that you must make an effort to impose your suggestion. The mere fact of making an effort will bring into play the conscious will, and that will in fact erect a barrier between the subconscious and suggestion, and prevents the latter from penetrating. Now then, from what I have said of the superiority of a general formula of autosuggestion, it should not be thought that I totally discourage the application of suggestion to specific ailments. On the contrary, it should be unreservedly recommended in all cases where it is desired to relieve pain, correct functional disorders, or alleviate their symptoms. Comfortable pain relief. For such purposes, here is my procedure. To make the pain disappear, rub the affected point lightly with the hand, repeating at the same time in a low voice, so quickly that it becomes a mere babble the words, "It's passing, I'm already better." In a few minutes the pain should disappear or, at least, diminish considerably. The reason for babbling the words is to avoid the risk of any other strange or contrary thoughts slipping through the cracks that might result from a clearer but slower diction. For the same reason, I advise English speakers to stick to the French version. It is much easier to say "c'est passé" than the longer and clumsier expression "it is passing" or "it is going." Getting to sleep. Those who suffer from insomnia will proceed differently. Once comfortably settled in bed, they will repeat, and not mumble, "I'm going to sleep, I'm going to sleep," in a calm, placid, and even voice. Avoiding, of course, the slightest mental effort to achieve the desired result. The soporific effect of this droning repetition of suggestion is soon felt. Whereas, if one really tries to sleep, the waking spirit is kept alive by the negative idea, in accordance with the law of converted effort. Insomnia offers, indeed, a striking demonstration of the disastrous effect of the effort of the will, the result of which is just the opposite of that desired. Stuttering, lack of confidence and paralysis cured. Stuttering is also a painful affliction, which easily yields to autosuggestion. I have known cases of cures effected in a single session, although this, of course, is rare. What is the cause of stuttering? Simply the fear or the idea that one is going to stutter. If you can replace that idea with the conviction or suggestion that you will not stutter, that you are able to say 10 words without stuttering, then there is no reason for you to stumble on the 11th, then you are cured. Nervousness, shyness, lack of confidence, and what is worse, nervous phenomena, can be eradicated by the practice of autosuggestion. For they are simply the consequences of an autosuggestion of a wrong, unnatural character. Those who suffer from such diseases should set up a different train of suggestions, saying, "I am not nervous, I am well and full of confidence, everything is going well." In an attack of anger, try the effect of suddenly muttering, "I am calm," and you will be surprised. There are quite a number of cases of paralysis, which are due solely to the patient's belief in his inability to use the affected limb or part. Certainly, all of them can be easily cured. Implant the notion, "I can walk, I can move my arm, or leg, or finger," and the cure is achieved. Why? Because, although the injury that originally produced the paralysis has healed, the patient has lost the habit of using his limb and continues to think that he is unable to do so. It is obvious that, however strong the effects of that subconscious notion may be, those of a contrary notion must be equally strong, if only the suggestion can be transmitted to the subconscious mind. That is the whole secret. Chapter 4. Diseases that can be cured. Let us now speak a little of the concrete diseases which can be cured by autosuggestion. I must repeat what I have said in a previous chapter, that it is very difficult to set any limit to the powers of autosuggestion, within the limits of possibility, of course. For, even in cases of diseases described as incurable, I could observe such an extraordinary improvement, effected in the condition of the patients, that the most extravagant hopes would seem justified. Organic diseases can be influenced. It may be stated without hesitation, that even organic disorders fall within the influence of autosuggestion. I am aware that this contradicts the theory of a certain number of physicians who, perhaps, judge the matter too hastily. But my assertion is supported by many other eminent members of the fraternity, in France and elsewhere, who have found its truth demonstrated by actual facts. Dr. Vacher, professor of the Psychotherapeutic School of Paris, and a distinguished member of the body of physicians, who have begun to employ autosuggestion and suggestion as an adjunct to the ordinary resources of medicine. This doctor recently cited the case of a young woman cured of ulcers in the stomach through the new method. There was no misdiagnosis. X-rays had been taken. A surgical operation had been prescribed. By means of suggestion, without the aid of drugs or other treatments, the patient was cured in 2 months. Within the first week, the vomiting had stopped. The same practitioner mentions the rapid disappearance of a tumor in the 10th rib, the victim being a young girl who also suffered from a fissure in the anus. The girl had been ill for 2 years and bedridden for 3 months. Her temperature was high and her general condition bad. The power of suggestion cured her in 15 days, the tumor disappeared completely, and the fissure healed without a trace. This shows that symptoms can be cured, even if the disease itself does not. In the course of my own experience, one of the most remarkable cases I can remember is that of a boy who, if not actually cured of a serious heart condition, endocarditis, at least got rid of all the symptoms. He now lives and enjoys life as if in perfect health. One day the door of my study opened, and in walked a pale, thin young man, leaning heavily on his father's arm. At every step he stopped, and every breath he took was like the painful panting of an exhausted animal. Poor boy! He did not expect to be able to do much for him. However, after his father had explained his illness to me, I took care of him and demonstrated to him the power of autosuggestion by means of some simple experiments, such as I usually do during my lectures. For example, I made him clench his hands tightly, and then I showed him that he could not let go of them while he was thinking and saying, "I can't, I can't." The boy was convinced. He left full of confidence, promising to recite my formula regularly and to practice conscientiously the principles of autosuggestion. I saw him a few weeks later, and the change was already considerable. He was walking and breathing better, although his condition was still pitiful. However, the boy persevered, and indeed, he was improving every day, and when I heard from him again, he was playing tennis. He was exempted from military service during the war because the medical examination showed that he was still suffering from his heart problem, although to all intents and purposes, he was a muscular and well-developed young man. Which shows that symptoms can always be alleviated by autosuggestion, even when the disease itself is incurable. Diabetes. Let us now talk about diabetes. According to certain modern authorities, this condition may sometimes have its origin in nervous trouble. Generally, of course, it is organic. In any case, I have known it often yields to autosuggestion, which is practiced with perseverance. Recently, a patient managed to reduce the amount of sugar by 80 grams in less than a month, while several painful symptoms disappeared. It can also help tuberculosis. Without venturing to declare that tuberculosis can be cured by autosuggestion, I do say that in many cases, it can be successfully combated. By the practice of autosuggestion, the resistance of the organism is strengthened, and the patient helps nature's own tendency to react against the disease. This is true, in fact, in all cases of general weakness. I know a lady of 60 who had been ill during the greater part of her life, and who, when she first came to me, believed she was near death. She weighed a mere 98 pounds. Autosuggestion transformed her. The idea of health implanted in her subconscious gave her a self-confidence unknown until then. Her health improved to such an extent that she recovered from an attack of pulmonary congestion, which her doctor believed she could not resist, and has increased her weight by 26 pounds. Sciatica, gastric troubles, constipation, asthma, and headaches improved with ease. All of these easily yielded to autosuggestion. There is a man who had suffered from headaches for 30 years, who took aspirin and similar drugs regularly on certain days of the week. Note the power of suggestion. He was convinced that he would have a headache on such a day, and he did. Now he has put his mind to work on other lines, and has been cured of his chronic headaches. I also know a man who suffered from sciatica and who, according to a letter he wrote me the other day, has had practically no pain since the day he came to hear me explain the practice of autosuggestion. And the young woman, who now thinks nothing of walking 8 miles, although by her doctor's orders, had considered herself an invalid for many years, hardly daring to move from her bed or her couch. It is possible to repair lost tissue. As astonishing as these results may seem, they are perfectly logical and natural, since it has been demonstrated that, under certain conditions, lost tissue can be repaired by the exercise of autosuggestion. Women can maintain and enhance their beauty. And now, a word of comfort for my beautiful readers who fear losing their beauty. Of course you are right, you want to stay young, fresh, and beautiful. And you can do so if you realize that you yourselves hold the secret. It is that little fairy that dwells in your subconscious and asks for nothing better than to smooth out those impertinent wrinkles, put healthy flesh under sagging cheeks, or restore the smiling glow to dull eyes. And of course, just train your imagination to visualize your face or your body as you would like it to be, and you will have many possibilities to see them get pretty close to your ideal. I'm not saying that you can change the color of your eyes, or your hair, or change the shape of your chin or your nose. We must always stick to what is materially possible. But you can improve your appearance and ward off the attacks of age and fatigue. Fatigue, by the way, should not be possible if you practice autosuggestion. It is largely a matter of imagination. Suppose you have to perform a task. If you think beforehand, this is going to be difficult and exhausting, it will surely be so, and you will yawn and feel very tired and bored. But if you are in a different frame of mind, and you say, this is going to be easy, I'm going to enjoy doing it, then you will not feel the slightest trace of fatigue. The best way to make hard work easy is to get down to work. You have to observe the ordinary rules of health. It goes without saying that the practice of autosuggestion will not dispense with the observance of the ordinary rules of health and hygiene. Remember, we are using the forces of nature, so it would be foolish to try to fight them at the same time. Lead a rational life. Do not overeat and chew your food well. Get enough exercise and avoid excesses. These are the laws of nature. Their observance, combined with the knowledge of the almighty effects of autosuggestion, will keep you in good physical and moral health. And it will enable you to successfully combat any of the ills to which the human body is heir by tradition and inheritance. The physician is a necessity. Let me add with the utmost insistence that I do not advise you to dispense with the services of a doctor. Evidently, there are many cases in which his advice, his medicine, and his care are absolutely indispensable. And always the presence, the prestige, and the encouraging words of a doctor are useful for the patient. Especially if he also takes advantage of the wonderful instrument which he has at his disposal and accompanies his prescription with the right suggestions. The results will be achieved much more quickly. I want both patients and physicians to understand that autosuggestion is a formidable weapon against disease. Chapter 5. The Moral Power of Autosuggestion. Leaving for a moment the subject of physical cures effected by autosuggestion, let us discuss the role of the latter in relation to our moral well-being. Educate a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not depart from it, said the man of wisdom thousands of years ago. And his words are as true now as they were then. And what is this training but the art of implanting a mass of suggestions in the young and receptive mind? Those suggestions may be good or bad, and on them depends the whole destiny of the child. Later I will have to comment on the subject of rational and scientific education of children, but for the moment, I would like to insist on the importance of suggestion and autosuggestion for society. Moral health is essential to physical health, and it is in the interest of the community at large to improve the moral health of its weakest elements. Granted the efficacy of autosuggestion in the accomplishment of this task, it should be clear to all that the new method opens up a magnificent panorama of possibilities in the direction of social progress. It provides us with the means to combat victoriously the bad streaks of our nature, whether inherited or acquired, and to develop our intelligence. Of curbing a capricious imagination, of adding balance to our judgment, of modifying our mentality, of correcting our moral weaknesses while curing our bodily ills. Its generalization should lead to individual and social reform, and the time may come when, freed from evil suggestions, which are so many poisons weakening mankind, both spiritually and physically. The world having purged itself of all its morbid elements, the criminal classes may embark upon a new and glorious phase of fuller harmony. Psychic culture is as necessary as physical culture. We all recognize the value of physical culture. It is no exaggeration to say that to its revival in my own country, and to the consequent formation of a generation of sturdy, strong-limbed young men, full of vigor and endurance, we owe in considerable measure our victory in the Great War. Well, psychic culture is equally necessary. It will teach us to think simply and sanely. It will teach us to realize that we can be, and must be, the masters of events, and not their playthings. Psychic culture, by means of suggestion and autosuggestion, corrects our moral deformities, just as physical culture corrects our bodily defects. We cannot all become champions, but we can all develop our personality in the spiritual or moral domain, just as we can all increase our muscular strength by appropriate exercises. Autosuggestion to combat criminal tendencies. Autosuggestion, then, I am persuaded, is destined to be applied more and more, generally, in the efforts of the world to eradicate crime. I have had occasion to try my method at Nancy with some boys of bad character, whose precocious criminal instincts had led them to the reformatory. I believe that good results were obtained, but unfortunately, I could not continue the experiments for a long period. For the poor young people, sent in batches, remained only a few weeks before being transferred to the central establishment in another city. However, the French authorities are very favorable to a prolonged trial of my method, and I hope to devote myself to this task in the near future. I may say also that I have found a great interest manifested in America in this question of autosuggestion as a remedy against the growth of crime. The power of suggestion in crime. It is a well-known fact that crime is contagious. From time to time, all countries have crime waves or epidemics, simply because the mind is influenced by suggestions from no matter what source. All more or less according to the degree of sensitivity or the strength of character of the individual. In France, some time ago, the newspapers were full of details about a daring train robbery. Immediately afterwards, there was a repetition of the crime, perpetrated in exactly the same way. And within a fortnight, there were 5 or 6 similar train robberies, the details of the execution being identical in all cases. The epidemic was the result of a suggestion. Recently there occurred in Paris a strange and striking illustration of the power of suggestion and autosuggestion, the one provoking the other and translating them into acts. A maniac, pricked with a needle or a syringe, a woman who was shopping in a grocery store, injecting her with some liquid, which caused a swelling of the affected part. The newspapers published a few lines about it, and the next day, 2 or 3 other similar cases were recorded. The number continued to grow until the victims were counted by dozens, and no less strange was the fact that, while the suggestion created the prickers, autosuggestion created the victims. For a great number of women were led by pure imagination to believe themselves pricked and to feel the pain of a sudden prick. Curiously, there was a similar epidemic in the time of Louis XV. Another example of criminal contagion, we find it in the series of scalping in the 17th century, when during a certain period, not a day passed without 1 or more women were shaved by crazed ruffians. 20 years ago there was a similar epidemic. The cinema, the movies, must again be regarded in some respects as a school of crime, because of the terrible effects of suggestion on unbalanced or unformed minds. And the fashion of the Nick Carter-style story has been responsible for the wreck of many young lives in my country. Suggestion in reform schools. Having thus demonstrated the role of suggestion in provoking crime, it is logical to suppose that suggestion is equally effective as a weapon against crime. The idea is everything, since it carries the germ of action. The field of suggestion in reformatories is immense. It could be practiced collectively. With the seed of suggestion sown indiscriminately at the beginning, the good soil would soon be discovered by its fruits. Then it would be necessary to separate the good from the bad, because by virtue of the eternal law of the contagion of ideas, the subjects influenced by the suggestions would mutually reinforce each other, while the neighborhood of the refractory ones would tend to increase their resistance to the good suggestions. The vice can be overcome. To people who ask me if vice can really be overcome, I answer emphatically that it can. By suggestion, long and repeated, character can be modified. One proof that education, or suggestion, modifies character is that the instinct of self-preservation, the strongest of all, can be overcome, as is attested by the many acts of sublime and total self-sacrifice on behalf of others, recorded in all ages. Suggestion acts as a restraint on evil instincts, that is its negative role. It has a positive role, acting as a propelling force for good impulses. Systematically and scientifically applied, there is no doubt that a large part of the classes branded criminals could be recovered, and thousands of outcasts transformed into clean thinking, clean living, useful citizens. This is especially true as regards the young, with their keen and vigorous imagination, open to any impression. Surely, it is the duty of those in authority to see that their imagination is fed with something better than the germs of crime. The susceptibility of youth is such that it is easy, except in cases, fortunately rare, of wholly bad characters, to create in their minds vivid images or ideas of good deeds. Once anchored in the subconscious, these ideas must inevitably develop and finally externalize themselves in acts. Chapter 6. Autosuggestion in the Education of Children. Paradoxical as it may seem to those who have not fully understood the principles and functioning of autosuggestion, the education of a child begins even before he is born. Without going back to the explanations I have given in the preceding chapters, suffice it to say that the imagination plays the supreme role in all the functions of life. And that, by disciplining it, that is to say, by exercising autosuggestion, a mother-to-be can not only determine the sex of her child, which has been demonstrated by certain medical authorities, but also, to a large extent, its physical and moral characteristics. She only has to let her imagination deposit in her subconscious the image of the son or daughter she desires, and the qualities she wishes the unborn child to possess. The result is assured. Even more important, perhaps, is the fact that such a child will yield to suggestion more easily than most. This does not mean that his character is weak. On the contrary, most likely, as he grows up, he will exchange suggestion for autosuggestion and achieve perfect self-control. It is only necessary to remember that our acts and actions are, for the most part, the result of suggestions or past external examples. Therefore, the importance of beginning early the education of the child, and of controlling suggestions, intended to influence and mold the young mind, should be obvious to all. Parents and educators must be careful to implant in him only good suggestions, and protect him at all costs from bad ones. How should this be done? I will try to give some indications or suggestions. They should be taken as general, of course. They can be modified or adapted to individual issues and circumstances. How to deal with children. Be even-tempered with them, speaking to them in a gentle but firm tone, persuading them to obey, without giving them the temptation to resist your influence. Never be abrupt with a child, because if you do, you run the risk of provoking a feeling of fear, accompanied by sullenness or even hatred. Avoid speaking ill of people in the presence of children, for it is inevitable that they will later follow your example. And backbiting often leads to disaster. Try to awaken in them the desire to understand nature. Keep their interest. Answer their questions with clarity and good humor. Don't give them the runaround, as many of us are tempted to do, with answers like, "Don't bother me, you'll find out later," etc. Above all, never tell a child that he is a storyteller, or a slacker, or a dunce, or worse. Remember that such suggestions have a strong tendency to become realities, just like better class suggestions. Encouragement is especially necessary for children. It is better to say, to a child inclined to be lazy or negligent, "Well, you have done much better than usual today. I am very pleased with your work. You are improving." It may not be true, but it doesn't matter either. The idea of improvement, of excellence, of effort, will sink into the child's mind, and gradually, with judicious encouragement, will unconsciously become a fact. Avoid speaking of disease before children. For autosuggestion is quick to carry the idea to the physical plane and develop the very disease you wish to avoid. Teach them, on the contrary, that good health is normal. Illness, an anomaly, a humiliation, which is only a consequence of non-observance of the laws of nature. Never frighten children. Do not let a child fear the elements. Man is made to withstand cold, heat, rain, wind, etc. without harmful effects. It's just an idea that creates weakness. It is cruel to frighten children by telling them about monsters, goblins, and the like. The fear thus instilled may persist in the future and ruin their life and destiny. Make the work attractive. It is easy to make a child like the work and study by making the lessons attractive, by anecdotes appropriate to the subject, as well as explaining the difficult points with a smile and conveying the impression that everything is very simple. The ideal of the educator should be to make his students look forward to the next lesson. Undoubtedly, it is necessary to instill the love of work with the idea that work is natural and indispensable, and that idleness is abnormal, unhealthy, and leads to all sorts of physical and moral evils. The flexible mind of a child easily assimilates such suggestions, which become permanent, and which will mold and build his character. Teach only good examples. It is unnecessary, and does not belong to this chapter, to enumerate all the qualities which a child should possess. What I wish to explain is the use of suggestion and autosuggestion in their education and training. We all know that example is better than precept, but we realize the truth of this even more strongly after studying the power of autosuggestion. And children are particularly sensitive to suggestion. They are always ready to copy what they see, good or bad. So the first duty of parents and educators is to give only good examples. Suggestion to children while they sleep. Suggestion can be practiced with wonderful effects to correct any defects in a child's character and to develop the qualities he lacks. Every night, just when the child is about to go to sleep, or when he is already asleep, place yourself a meter away from him. Then murmur in a low voice what you wish to obtain, repeating 15 to 20 times the qualities you wish to provoke and the defects you wish to correct. Do not be afraid to repeat monotonously the same phrases. It is the most powerful way to reach the subconscious. This one does not need eloquence to be impressed. It is enough to enunciate the idea. More than that, it is counterproductive for the ends that are pursued. Suggestion in the school. In the schools, remarkable results can be obtained if the teachers practice suggestion in their classes every day before the classes begin. The pupils should be told to close their eyes, and then they can be told something, as follows. "Children, I am sure you are going to be good, polite and kind to everyone, and obedient to your parents and teachers. You will always take note of their remarks, because you know it is for your own good. You are intelligent, so you love your work, even the subjects you used to dislike. In class, your attention will always be alert and attentive to what your teacher says. You will only feel sorry for the other children who may be wasting time foolishly and playing during class. As you are very intelligent, you will have no difficulty in understanding the lesson, whatever the subject, and you will remember everything you are told. Everything will be stored up in your mind, ready to be used directly when your knowledge is required. Character is formed by imagination. Of course, the above is but a sample of what might be said by way of suggestion. Teachers can modify it, and no doubt, improve it to suit their particular needs. The important thing is to practice suggestion in this way. It doesn't matter if the children laugh a little at first, or if their attention wanders. Or if when the morning suggestion, it is not desirable, of course, that they know the purpose of it, has become habitual, they automatically hear the words without hearing them. In any case, the words reach the subconscious, and the ideas conveyed do their work just as effectively. In a word, it is essential that a child is impregnated the right kind of suggestions. Everything depends on it. Playing with the imagination. Character is formed with imagination. Most often, what is attributed to heredity, both in the moral and physical field, is the consequence of ideas germinated by example. It is impossible to believe that a child is born a criminal. He becomes one by autosuggestion, just as he can become a valuable member of the community as a result of autosuggestion, guided in the right direction. Chapter 7. The Masters of Our Destinies. Monsieur Jourdain, known as the gentle bourgeois man, spoke prose without knowing it. In the same way, we all practice autosuggestion, though often without being aware of it. To some extent, autosuggestion can be automatic, in the sense that it may not be inspired or guided by deliberate reflection. But how much more powerful it must be in our lives when we have learned its mechanism and discovered how to use it for our own purposes. The act of breathing is automatic, yet we can modify the way we breathe at will. We can improve our health by learning to breathe in a certain way, and by doing regular breathing exercises. The same is true of autosuggestion. Once we become aware of its power, and learn to control it, we are the masters of our destinies. Babies automatically practice autosuggestion. Let me give you an illustration of the automatic practice of autosuggestion. A newborn baby, in its crib, begins to cry. Immediately its mother takes it in her arms, the baby stops crying, and is returned to the crib. Then, the crying starts again, to stop once more, if the baby is lifted out of its crib. The operation can be repeated an almost unlimited number of times, always with the same result. The child, lacking conscious thought, automatically practices autosuggestion. He obtains the gratification of his unconscious desire to be taken in his mother's arms while she is crying. If he is resisted, on the contrary, if he is left to cry alone in his crib, his subconscious mind will register the fact, and the baby will not take the trouble to cry, because he knows it will have no effect. Self-mastery means health. And so it is with everyone, from birth to death. We live by autosuggestion. We are governed by our subconscious mind. Fortunately, we can guide it with our reason. However, like everything else, the science of autosuggestion has to be learned. It is a matter of educating oneself until total control of the subconscious mind is achieved. That means self-mastery in health. Prevention is better than cure. The idea of good health begets good health, and if by accident we are attacked by disease, we are sure to have an infinitely greater chance of resisting and quickly get rid of the disease by practicing autosuggestion than if we know nothing of its principles. Have you not noticed this during epidemics? It is a well-known fact that people who, at such times, go serenely about their business, without worrying about themselves and without thinking of the epidemic, except to tell themselves that they are sure of not contracting the disease, are almost always immune and escape contagion. On the other hand, nervous people, frightened by the cases around them, and who allow their thoughts constantly focus on the prevailing disease. These are people who are sure to fall ill, in spite of all their precautions. In the annals of the Faculty of Paris, astonishing cases of the power of suggestion are recorded. Professor Boucher relates, among many others, the following. An old woman, after having undergone a desperate surgical operation, was dying. Her son was due to arrive from India 2 days later. Humanly speaking, it was impossible for him to live that long. The method of suggestion was resorted to. She was told that she was better, and that she would see her son the next day. The result was a success. 15 days later, the old woman was still alive. And from a medical point of view, that was a miracle. Equally miraculous, in appearance, was the case of a man who held an important position in Nancy a few years ago. He came to me suffering from sinusitis. He had been operated on 11 times, but the terrible disease was still raging. He was in a horrible state, physically and morally. Day and night, without interruption, the wretch was tortured by excruciating pains in his head, which prevented him from sleeping. His weakness was extreme, and his appetite non-existent. Most of the time, he lay helpless on a couch. I confess that I had little hope of being able to do anything for him. However, I tried hard to convince him of the efficacy of suggestion. And although there seemed to be no improvement, during 5 or 6 sessions, I could see that the man, sick as he was, had acquired an absolute faith in the soundness of the theories I had put to him. He told me that every day he was directing his subconscious mind towards the idea of curing his illness. Then, one day he told me that he thought he felt a slight improvement, but he was not quite sure. However, it was the truth, and the improvement continued. A complete cure quickly followed. Today the man is perfectly healthy, able to work without fatigue. The nasal discharges which occurred daily had at last ceased. I remember another remarkable case of collective autosuggestion, this time more or less automatic. It occurred in the hospital services of Dr. Renaud, in Paris. A new serum had just been discovered, a supposed cure for tuberculosis. It was tested on patients. Apparently, as a result of the injections, all showed immediate improvement. The cough subsided, and other symptoms disappeared, and the general condition of all began to be very satisfactory. But, alas, soon after it was learned that the famous serum, of which the patients unconsciously hoped so much, was nothing more than an ordinary medicine which had been previously tested with negative results. Instantly, with the fading of their illusions, the sick lost all the improvement obtained, and their old symptoms reappeared. Modern miracles. Miracles occur in our time, as they have done in the past. I refer to things that are called miracles. For of course, there is no such thing as miracles. The modern miracle is worked by autosuggestion, the marvelous force entrusted to us by nature, and which, if we only probe its mysteries, will make us all-powerful within the limits of human possibilities. Fatality and fatalism will lose their meaning. Indeed, they will not be able to exist, except in our erroneous imagination. Because we will be the only ones who will forge our own destiny, always rising above the circumstances and external conditions that may cross our path from time to time. Chapter 8. The Future of Autosuggestion. At this point, it may be interesting to advance a little and take a look at the future of autosuggestion. I have no doubt that the principles of autosuggestion are now firmly established, and that a solid basis for its practical application has been prepared. This application will become more and more widespread as the principles become better known, especially among physicians. I cannot insist too strongly that autosuggestion, far from being in conflict with medical science, is perfectly in harmony with it. And it is destined to become one of the most powerful curative elements at the disposal of physicians. There was a period of considerable activity in psychological research at the end of the last century, when Charcot and the famous Salpêtrière schools took the lead in proclaiming the curative possibilities of the idea or suggestion. In Nancy, Leibold and Bernheim were also in the forefront of the same movement. Psychological research was halted by materialism and fatalism. There followed a period of skepticism and materialism. It was declared that thought was but a secretion of the brain, and consciousness a mere mass of sensations, doomed to be the plaything of circumstances. Our evils were irreparable because they were inherited, and it was useless to fight against the legacy of the past. This conception tinged the philosophy of the time, transformed poets into pessimists, and turned doctors into fatalists. Psychology seemed to be completely separated from philosophy. Ideas were considered effects, incapable of being causes. Doubt and pessimism won the minds of the intellectual classes and filtered through the masses. Abstract philosophical ideas were practically applied for therapeutic purposes. But reaction was at hand. Soon a new, brighter, and healthier philosophy emerged, with Bergson and others, to reveal the amazing natural forces at our fingertips, which for so long had been ignored or neglected. If I mention myself here, it is simply to say that I have done nothing else than to demonstrate the possibility for everyone to use for his own physical and moral well-being the force of the subconscious, revealed by the diffuse and abstract notions of the new school of philosophy. Others will continue the work, but I think I can say that the foundations have already been laid of a new practical philosophy with definite therapeutic applications. It is admitted that the human mind is a far greater force than was previously believed. The facts, cures obtained by suggestion and autosuggestion, in cases even of organic diseases, have come to demonstrate the importance of the idea in the treatment of bodily ills. In London, Paris, and New York, institutes are being established for the practice of autosuggestion. From the purely experimental stage, the doctrine of autosuggestion is sufficiently mature to enter the domain of universal application. In Paris, it is already being brought to the crest of a great scientific movement, which promises to grow rapidly under the leadership of a group of enthusiasts, members of the Faculty of Medicine, philosophers, and savants. An institute for the teaching and practice of autosuggestion has been founded, and I hope others will be created in other cities in all parts of the world. There will soon be one in New York. At the Paris Institute, a body of trained men and women, some belonging to the medical profession, such as my disciple, Dr. Pierre Vacher, as well as also the professor of the École de Psychologie, and Dr. Varied, constitute a permanent teaching body, whose mission is to spread, by means of explanations and experiments, the knowledge of the so-called mysterious forces which we all possess, and to show patients how to use them for the benefit of their own health. Thus, autosuggestion is becoming more and more an experimental science, and an element of the first order, both in the field of therapeutics, as in those of sociology and education. The creation of institutes such as the one in Paris will, I am convinced, be a powerful stimulant to the study of the wonderful resources of our subconscious self. The development of applied psychology is just beginning. Applied psychology, whose vast developments have only just begun, will teach us to know ourselves better, to possess ourselves more completely, to control the supreme powers with which nature has endowed us, and to use them for the development of our character and of our physical, intellectual, and moral well-being. The subject far surpasses the individual. Society as a whole will benefit from man's self-mastery. Our physician has been called the last of the magicians. But we can all be much greater than the magician by simply utilizing the stupendous moral power and brain energy latent within us. to revive the intelligence paralyzed by doubt or ignorance, to regenerate the physical organism, to strengthen the moral fiber. Such are the objectives to be achieved, presaging an ennoblement of human nature, the consequences of which cannot be easily calculated. With means within the reach of all, we will achieve the progress of humanity, and each one will be able to feel in himself the growth of that sublime force, which elevates the person morally and physically. Perhaps one day, the dreams of utopians will come true, and humanity will shake off the chains of materialism, which still separate us from what we believe to be supernatural knowledge, but which, in reality, is already in us, just waiting to be discerned. Who knows? Perhaps the prisons will become unnecessary, when we have learned that even evil and wrongdoing can be overcome by suggestion. Backward children will become normal, and the wayward will be taught, through their subconscious, to become good and useful citizens. People are still ignorant the immense benefits that autosuggestion, employed for curative and educational purposes, can bring to the individual and to society. But the light is spreading, and it will not be long before the new science will definitely take its place among psychological, sociological, and medical studies. Autosuggestion may develop more rapidly in America than in Europe. Perhaps the study and practice of autosuggestion are destined to advance more rapidly on the American side of the Atlantic than on the European. I do not know. However, I do know that hundreds of American men and women have not hesitated to cross the ocean to investigate my system in Nancy. In America, I found myself among a multitude of friends and followers, all eager to contribute to the propagation of the idea of autosuggestion. The conversion of such energy must necessarily be a tremendous power. So I am quite prepared to see the science more widely promoted and developed in the dynamic atmosphere of the New World than in my own country. I am not a quack. When standing under the shadow of the Statue of Liberty, I was bombarded with questions by a score of representatives of the press who had come on board the Majestic. Especially to meet my humble self, I began to get a slight idea of the interest aroused in America by the announcement of my lecture tour. When soon after, I found myself escorted by stout American policemen from the ship to the automobile which was waiting for me to take me to my temporary home. And when I saw the crowd assembled to welcome me, I was inexpressibly surprised and moved that I should be considered worthy of such a reception. Will I be accused of lack of modesty if I say that I am proud and pleased to have been thus received? I think not, for I know that all this sympathy and interest must be attributed to the characteristic eagerness of the Americans to learn and deepen their knowledge of the methods of autosuggestion associated with my name. Since my arrival in New York, the memory of which will never fade, I have not ceased to marvel at all that I have seen, heard, and read. Of my general impressions, I shall have much to say later. I am still dominated in a way that feeling of surprise which overwhelmed me in my first contact with the American people. In fact, my astonishment has grown every day as I realize the ideas that many people seem to have formed of me and my powers. I do not want people to have a kind of fanatical belief in me. It is true, of course, that blind faith is always an asset in favor of the chances of healing a sick person. People who come to me with the belief already established in their minds that they will be cured are more than halfway to recovery even before they see me. But the number of people who may come in direct contact with me must be necessary and relatively small. And even if I were to possess some extraordinary magnetic power to heal, which I emphatically state I do not possess, the results of such power would be limited for obvious reasons. Whereas there are no limitations for the potentialities of the system I teach. I mean that I cannot reach everyone, but everyone can practice autosuggestion. My aim, therefore, is only to show you how to heal yourselves. Get rid of the totally erroneous idea that I can heal. I am not a healer, nor am I a healer. I had a first sign of the mistake I was making in America when the newspaper reporters at the Majestic addressed me as Doctor and Professor, and I was obliged to correct them, reminding them that I am not a doctor, nor am I a professor. The newspapers keep talking about the cures which I have effected in my so-called clinics. A bad word, by the way, for the small meetings in which I meet with a select number of patients. In order to try to convince them that by following my methods of autosuggestion, they can be cured, or at least obtain an appreciable improvement. Undoubtedly, it has been a joy for me to see many of these poor sick people being benefited by my teachings. But my joy will be even greater if I succeed in extending faith in these methods to hundreds of thousands of people and instill in them the knowledge that they can be cured without seeing me at all. And it will be impossible to achieve that goal if the impression is allowed to persist that it is necessary to come into personal contact with me in order to obtain good results. Unfortunately, it is very difficult to convince some people that I do not have some influence over them. When I tell them that they must rely on themselves, not on me, they often reply, "I don't care what you say, you do have power, and when I am with you I get better results than when I am alone." Well, that may be true in many cases. But the reason is, as I have already indicated, that a person who has faith enough to come to me is already half healed by that same faith. There is another aspect of the question. If I possessed any real power, I would surely have the same effect on everyone. But this is not so. On some my influence is absolutely nil, while on others it may be immense. This shows that it is not and cannot be an essential factor in the effectiveness of my system. It exists merely in the imagination of certain people, and as I have explained, I hope convincingly, in previous chapters, the imagination is all-powerful. So that in such cases, it really helps to regain health. But it would be a regrettable action to allow it to be thought that personal contact with me is necessary. I want American citizens all over the continent to understand that all they need is a proper understanding of the principles of autosuggestion, which is simplicity itself, together with a belief in its efficacy. Simply apply truths that have been known for thousands of years. I do not claim to have invented anything. I have merely reduced to a simple formula for everyday use and practice theories that have been known to be true for thousands of years. Still less have I invented a new faith, as some seem to infer. One day, a gentleman, interviewed by one of the newspapers, described my method of autosuggestion as a direct challenge to the church. I confess that I see no connection between religion and autosuggestion. Is medicine a challenge to the church? Autosuggestion is nothing more than the use of natural forces and functions of our being. And it can be practiced by Catholics and Protestants, Islamists or Buddhists, without violating any of the precepts or doctrinal principles of those churches or religions. Didn't St. Paul write about the faith that moves mountains? Surely, it can't be wrong to make use of the faculties that the Creator Himself has given us. No relation to religion. Other religious leaders look askance at autosuggestion because it has come to be associated with supposed miracles, which I am supposed to have worked. Now, miracles do not exist. I have never done any, and never will. In fact, the supposed miracle cures are the simplest and easiest to explain of all. They show that, in reality, the sick people were only thinking that they were sick. The thought produced, or prolonged, the symptoms. And in that sense, they were really sick. But the moment they were made to understand that their ills could be overcome by imagination, they were cured. It may seem unnecessary that I should reply to the few criticisms to which I have been subjected in the atmosphere of exceptionally sympathetic interest in which I found myself in America. But I am anxious to clear up all misunderstandings. I wish to be taken seriously by serious people. I want everyone to be convinced that the theories I propose, reduced as they are to their simplest expression, are built on a basis of scientific fact.
Thank you for joining us on this enlightening journey through Émile Coué's My Method of Autosuggestion. May the principles and practices shared in this audiobook serve as a guiding light on your path to self-improvement and personal transformation. Remember, the power to shape your reality lies within you. Embrace the gift of autosuggestion, and may it empower you to manifest your deepest desires and aspirations. Farewell, and may your journey ahead be filled with abundance, joy, and fulfillment.